Imagine a maximum security prison in New York. Late at night, the yard is silent, then suddenly, the screech of a prison van's brakes cuts through the stillness. Lights flash, guards scramble. This is the new reality for Daniel Guinness. He sits in cell block D3, shackled, watching his old life disappear through the bars. They called him the Apologetic Bandit, a strange nickname for a strange habit. He'd rob people, then mail their wallets back. This only made the detectives more suspicious. He wasn't always a criminal. He was a bright student, full of ambition, with a gift for languages. It was that gift that caught the attention of Petra Szabo on a subway. She was worldly, elegant, and she actually laughed at his clumsy Russian-French pickup lines. 6 months later, they were married, but the honeymoon ended abruptly, in handcuffs. 5 counts of armed robbery. The sentence? 10 years inside. It's here, between the clang of steel gates and the lonely echo of solitary nights, that an unlikely story begins. On the outside, Petra's life was spiraling. She was navigating visa issues, moving from Budapest to New York, clinging to a future she thought was certain. But now, everything was up in the air. On the inside, Daniel was stripped of his Ivy League dreams and thrust into a world of pure survival. He traded his books for iron weights, his soul for a sentence. He witnessed brutal yard fights. He felt the hard, judging stares of inmates who recognized the look of addiction and desperation all too well. But Petra didn't disappear. She visited. She wrote letters. She listened. More than that, she saw him. She saw the man underneath the prison blues. Slowly, something shifted. Their loveless visits, separated by thick glass, turned into long, detailed letters. Their rare conjugal visits became desperate missions for mental survival. He started bodybuilding in prison, not for vanity, but to have something solid to hold onto, something he could control. She noticed the change in his physique, quietly. He tried to impress her, to show her he was still the man she married, that he was still worthy. She would just nod. Her silence was heavier than any applause could ever be. With every letter he mailed, every illicit phone call he made, the invisible walls between them started to feel a little thinner. They became partners in a bizarre mission, rebuilding a connection. When trust was shattered and his very identity was criminal, time itself seemed to move differently for them. She had a world of choices at her feet. He had a cell, 2 bunkmates, and 9 years left on his sentence. And yet, she waited, and he committed to this strange, broken version of a marriage. A strange paradox began to grow. She was free, but tethered to his fate. He was locked in a cage, but in some ways, he felt more seen, more understood, than he ever had before. But freedom, when he finally got a taste of it, turned out to be just another kind of cage. The world outside had moved on. Her life had shifted in ways he couldn't comprehend. His world, meanwhile, had narrowed to the 4 corners of his cell. The idea of us, whispered during a conjugal visit in the prison's most secure wing, was the only light he had. On their first wedding anniversary, he was already behind bars. Petra knew her life had changed forever. Daniel knew the man who had walked down the aisle was gone, replaced by the hardened man the prison walls demanded him to be. In the stark reality of prison, Daniel learned a painful lesson. Love didn't mean rescue. Not here. Not for him. It meant endurance. And that realization hurt more than the solitude. As the weeks bled into months, the prison that punished him also started to mature him. His ego, once so large, began to deflate. The facades he had built around himself started to crack. And through it all, she watched. She didn't leave. He found himself fighting, not for her, but for a version of himself that might one day be worthy of her unwavering presence. Then came a twist. During one of their visits, Daniel looked her straight in the eye and said it plainly, "You don't owe me anything. I'll understand if you walk away." Petra didn't answer for a long, heavy moment. She just stood up and told him she'd think about it. That night was one of the worst of Daniel's life. He saw a bunkmate get stabbed just feet from his own bed. The image was horrific, but when he closed his eyes, what haunted him more was the image of Petra in the visitors' gallery, her face a world away from the violence of his cell block. And this is where the story truly turns. During her next visit, Petra leaned forward and asked a question that hung in the air like a final judgment. "When you leave, What happens to us? In that moment, he realized he had no answer, and she realized she might never get her own life back on track. The strength of their bond was no longer a measure of love, but a brutal test of survival for both of them. A silent, terrifying question filled the space between them. Is love enough when one of you is locked away, possibly forever? As autumn turned to winter, even the guards started to notice a change. A prison warden remarked that Daniel's letters were different, less bravado, more reflection. A guard whispered to another, "He's changed," but the other guard just shook his head, unconvinced. The most powerful moment came during another one of Petra's visits. The security cameras captured her eyes lingering on his tattooed shoulder, on the muscle he had built inside those walls. But they also saw something softer in her gaze. Something that looked a lot like hope. But hope is a dangerous thing in a place like this. The system doesn't tolerate too much connection. The prison corridors are long, and footsteps echo with finality. Outside, life keeps moving, relentlessly. And the walls aren't just physical, they are emotional, temporal, existential. The question hanging over them shifted from if they would survive to who would break first. The prisoner, trapped inside, or the woman, trapped waiting on the outside. And just as we think we understand their struggle, the story delivers its final, devastating blow. A secret letter arrives in Daniel's cell. It's not from Petra, it's from a fellow inmate. It contains a photograph and a cryptic message that reveals Petra may not have been entirely alone in her choices while he was inside. Someone from her past has reappeared. Someone who could change everything. Daniel opens the envelope. The ink is smudged, the words chillingly simple. It's not just you in her story. In that cold, echoing corridor of D3, Daniel realizes the prison walls were never the only barrier between them. The real betrayal might have been inside his world all along. The envelope sat on Daniel's metal bunk like a storm waiting to break. In prison, letters were oxygen, but they were also weapons. He knew better than to trust anything passed hand to hand by another inmate. A whisper network fueled by boredom and cruelty. Still, his hands trembled as he unfolded the smudged paper. The message inside didn't accuse or name names. It didn't scream betrayal. It whispered it. And in a place like this, whispers were always more dangerous than shouts. But here's the thing, nothing in that letter could be proven. No names, no dates, no real evidence. Just a vague suggestion that his partner, Petra, wasn't alone on the outside. That maybe the years, the waiting, the sheer emotional weight of it all, had opened cracks in their foundation that he couldn't see from his cell. Yet the idea sank into Daniel's chest like a stone. It wasn't because the inmate who gave it to him was trustworthy. It wasn't because the letter held any real secrets. It was because the possibility itself felt terrifyingly real. Prison has a way of twisting time, stretching it into a slow, cruel distortion. On the outside, life moves forward. On the inside, it stagnates. Lovers age unevenly, their lives split onto different tracks, and loyalty, no matter how fierce, is forced to wrestle with an impossible distance. So that letter wasn't proof of anything. It was a mirror, reflecting every single fear Daniel had tried so hard to bury deep down. He went through the rest of the day carrying that weight. Morning count, yard time, the constant, echoing clang of metal gates, and the endless, droning routine of prison life. But something had shifted inside him. He started watching the other men more closely, men who had lost wives to loneliness, to exhaustion, to the simple temptation of a life that didn't have to wait for a release date that might never come. An old lifer named Ramos once told him, "Prison doesn't just lock you up, hermano. It locks up whoever loves you too." Some people survive it, some don't. Daniel had never forgotten those words, but now, they hit with a new, brutal force. That night, he sat down to write to Petra. He wrote with the chilling clarity of a man confronting two truths at once. He needed her more than ever, but his very existence might be destroying her. His letter wasn't angry or suspicious. It was raw, stripped of all pride. "Tell me honestly," he wrote, "is this still what you want?" Petra didn't respond for 3 days. In a maximum security facility, 3 days feel like 3 months in the free world. Every mail call was a fresh wave of anxiety. When her letter finally arrived, it wasn't thick with explanations. It was a single page, with the visitor request form clipped to it. She was coming, but the note itself contained only 9 words. We need to talk about what happens next for us. Those 9 words burned hotter than any accusation could have. This wasn't a promise of reunion. This was a crossroads. Visiting day cracked open the fragile calm Daniel had built inside himself. The guards searched him, scanned him, and marched him down the long hallway where hope and heartbreak always collided. He walked past glass partitions smeared with the fingerprints of despair. He passed men gripping phones, yelling through static at faces on a screen. He passed women holding up babies who wouldn't see their fathers outside these walls for years. And then, he saw her. Petra sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. Her eyes were tired, not just sleepy, but a deep, soul-level tired that comes from carrying someone else's life, along with your own. Daniel sat down across from her, the cold table between them feeling like a barrier stronger than any of the steel bars behind him. She didn't smile. He didn't either. "Your letter scared me," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Your silence scared me more," he answered, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. A long pause hung in the air, a shared breath, and then, without any ceremony, she told him the truth. "I've been overwhelmed," she began. "Immigration, work, life, and all this waiting. I've had moments where I didn't know if I could do this anymore. But I never betrayed you, Daniel. Not once. I just broke a little." She wasn't confessing infidelity. She was confessing sheer exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that nobody admits to until the weight becomes impossible to carry alone. Daniel felt the room tilt. The gut-wrenching fear of betrayal was replaced by a wave of realization. He had been so focused on his own survival inside these walls that he'd completely forgotten she was fighting her own battle on the outside. Petra continued, her voice steady but fragile. "I still love you, but love doesn't make this easy. And we need to be honest about what we're really choosing, what this life actually is." Her honesty cut deeper and cleaner than any lie ever could. But before they could speak another word, a piercing alarm blared through the hallway. The sudden, violent shriek of prison chaos. Guards rushed past their window. Inmates in the adjoining rooms were ordered against the walls. The tension in the air hit like a jolt of electricity. Daniel's heartbeat surged not because he feared for himself, but because Petra was here, caught in the middle of a place that could erupt without any warning. A guard shouted, "Stay seated. No one moves." Petra's face went pale. Daniel's fists clenched under the table, his knuckles white. The minutes stretched into an eternity before the alarm finally shut off. A fight in another wing, a lockdown narrowly avoided. But the moment left them both shaken, and Petra's hands didn't stop trembling. When the visiting officer finally gave them the signal to resume, her voice was even softer, more fragile than before. "I don't belong in this world," she whispered, looking around at the grim reality of the visiting room. "And I don't want you in it either." Daniel swallowed hard. This was love, not the dramatic, sensational romance promised in movies. This was the painful, complicated, messy truth of two people tied together across an impossible divide of steel and concrete. "Petra," he said slowly, choosing his words with immense, "I'm changing. I'm trying to become someone you won't have to rescue. But I need to know if you want to walk with me, or walk away." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she struggled to find an answer. But before she could speak, the officer stepped between them. Time was up. Petra rose from her chair. Daniel didn't. Their eyes met one last time through the glass of a world neither of them could control. "I'll write you," she said, but her voice wavered just enough for Daniel to feel that crack between them widen into a chasm. As he watched her walk away, Daniel stared down at the crumpled letter still in his pocket. The anonymous letter that started all of this. The letter that may not even have been true. But real or not, it had forced open a truth that neither of them could ignore any longer. Love behind bars walks a razor-thin tightrope between devotion and destruction. And the final test was coming. Because on the very next mail call, Daniel received an official notice from the parole board. A date had been set for an early review, a chance at freedom, a chance to get out. It came at the exact moment Petra was most uncertain about their future. The twist of fate tightened like a noose. Freedom might just save them, or It might be the one thing that finally destroys whatever pieces of them are left. The parole notice felt unreal in Daniel's hands. It was just a thin slip of paper, but it carried the weight of a lifetime, a full decade of confinement, violence, discipline, silence, and longing. All of it, somehow, funneled into this one sudden possibility: freedom. But freedom wasn't simple. Freedom meant a future outside these walls, and a future outside meant facing the reality he'd been trying to ignore. He and Petra might not survive it. That night, Daniel lay awake on his bunk long after lights out, just staring at the cracked ceiling. The metal frame of the bed creaked with every small shift of his body. His cellmate snored loudly. A guard's boots echoed down the hallway, each step like a pulse counting down time. The letter from Petra was tucked beneath his pillow. He hadn't read it again, but he didn't need to. She'd written it 2 days after their last tense visit. She said she needed space to think. She said she wasn't sure what was happening to them anymore. She said she'd always care for him, but she didn't know what that meant. And now, parole was coming. He could walk out into a world where she might not be waiting for him. The next morning, he stood before the parole board. There were 3 of them, a panel of officials who held his entire fate between their clipped pens and unreadable expressions. They asked him about his rehabilitation, his remorse, his addiction, his crimes. He answered every question carefully, honestly, but without a hint of desperation. It wasn't because he expected freedom, but because he had nothing left to hide. Years locked in a cage strips away every mask you've ever worn. When the hearing finally ended, they just dismissed him with a nod. He wouldn't know the result for weeks. Time, once again, became the enemy. But something completely unexpected happened only 4 days later. Daniel was summoned to the officer's desk. A guard handed him a phone. This was a rare privilege. It had to be an emergency call. "It's Petra," the officer said quietly. Daniel took the phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hello?" he whispered into the receiver. Her voice came through fractured and tense, like she'd been crying. "Daniel, something happened." His breath caught in his throat. "What? What's wrong?" "There was a break-in at my apartment," she said. "Nothing was stolen, but the police think someone was looking for documents, immigration papers, letters, maybe even yours." A cold wave washed through him. A targeted break-in. Nothing stolen, only an interest in papers. This wasn't random. "Did the police find anything?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No," she said. "But, Daniel, the door wasn't forced. It was opened with a key." A key. That meant it was someone who'd been there before. Someone who knew her. Someone who might still want access. It hit him like a physical blow. The letter. The warning. "It's not just you and her story." But now, this wasn't about jealousy. This was danger. "For your safety," he said, his voice firm. "You need to stay somewhere else." "Tonight?" "I already did," she whispered. "But I'm scared, Daniel. I don't know who to trust." He closed his eyes. For the first time since his arrest, he hated being behind bars. "I'll fix this," he said. But he couldn't. Not from where he was. The call ended. He sat down on the cold concrete bench in the hallway, his fists trembling. The prison walls, once a punishment, now felt like handcuffs, keeping him from protecting her. 2 more agonizing days passed before the warden himself called Daniel into his office. This was not normal. This was not routine. "Sit," the warden said, his tone unusually calm. Daniel obeyed. The warden leaned forward, his eyes fixed on him. "You've been approved for early release. Effective immediately. You'll be processed and out by Thursday." The room spun. The world seemed to turn upside down. Freedom not in weeks, not in months, in days. He barely heard the rest of the warden's instructions. He just nodded, signed papers, and answered questions mechanically. When he finally returned to his cell, the inmates around him clapped, cheered, and slapped his shoulders. But Daniel could barely manage a smile. This freedom didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a countdown. What was waiting for him outside? A broken apartment door, a shadow from Petra's past. Or worse, a threat she wasn't even telling him about yet. Release day arrived cold and bright. Daniel stepped out of the prison gates carrying 1 duffel bag and 1,000 unanswered questions. The breeze felt unreal against his skin. For years, he dreamed of this air without fences, space without echoes, a sky without razor wire. Petra wasn't there. She texted him that she wasn't ready to see him just yet. She needed more time. It hurt, but he understood. He found the temporary housing that had been arranged through a re-entry program. He kept his head down, trying to plan his next steps. Then, 3 nights later, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Petra. Just 5 words. I need you. Come now. Below it was an address. A location near Queens. A building he didn't recognize at all. Daniel grabbed his coat and ran to the nearest bus stop. When he arrived, the street was quiet to quiet. A single street lamp flickered above the building's entrance. The windows were all dark. The address matched, but nothing else about this felt right. He knocked once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He pulled out his phone and called her. It went straight to voicemail. A chill ran up his spine. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned sharply. A man stood in the shadow of the stairwell. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely unfamiliar. You Daniel? The man asked. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. Who's asking? The man didn't move. He didn't even blink. She ain't coming, he said quietly. She's done with all this. She wanted you to stop calling. Daniel froze. Petra hadn't asked him to come? The text wasn't from her? Someone had lured him here? The man took a step closer. You're out now. She's moving on. Let her. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He stepped back. The man stepped forward. You're not listening, the stranger growled, his voice a low rumble in the quiet street. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the cold brick wall at his back. Trapped. The man's shadow swallowed him whole. Every instinct screamed danger, but his feet felt like lead. Then, a sudden, blinding light. Headlights flared at the end of the street, slicing through the oppressive darkness. A car turned the corner, tires protesting against the asphalt. It was moving fast, way too fast. The stranger flinched, his head snapping up towards the sound, momentarily startled by the intrusion. That split second was all Daniel needed. Adrenaline surged through him, breaking the paralysis. He ran. He didn't look back, just pumped his legs, the sound of his own ragged breaths filling his ears. The car screeched to a halt right beside him, its tires smoking. A window rolled down with a soft whir. Daniel, get in. It was Petra's voice, strained and urgent. He didn't hesitate, didn't question. He wrenched the passenger door open and dove inside, slamming it shut behind him. The world lurched as Petra hit the gas. The car barreled through the empty street, the engine roaring in protest. Daniel risked a glance back. The man was a shrinking figure, a dark silhouette quickly consumed by the night. He was gone. Daniel leaned back against the seat, gasping for breath, his lungs burning. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a trembling that started in his hands and spread through his whole body. What the hell was that? He managed to say, the words catching in his throat. Who was that guy? What did he want? The questions swirled in his mind, a chaotic mess. He looked over at Petra. Her knuckles were white, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, but her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, wide with the fear he'd never seen before. That man, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine. He's my ex. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Daniel stared at her, trying to process it. An ex? Like this? Before you, she continued, her voice cracking. Before everything. I thought he was gone for good, but he came back. He wanted my papers. She took a shaky breath. And when he heard you were getting out, Daniel's blood ran cold. The implication hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just some random encounter. This was about him, about them. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice low. Why didn't you tell me you were in trouble? A single tear traced a path down her cheek, shimmering in the dashboard light. Because I thought he'd go away, she said, her voice breaking completely. I thought if I just ignored him, he would give up. But he didn't. He got worse. He started following me, leaving things on my doorstep. I was so scared. Daniel stared ahead into the inky blackness of the night, the city lights blurring into streaks as they sped away. The danger wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It was real, it was present, and it was breathing down their necks. The cozy future he had imagined just hours ago, a simple life with Petra after his release, shattered into a million pieces. The truth landed on them both with crushing weight. Their biggest threat wasn't the distance they'd endured, the heartbreak they'd navigated, or the cold, hard prison walls that had kept them apart. It was a man from Petra's past, a man who refused to let go. The car seemed to fly through the deserted streets, a small metal shell carrying them deeper into the unknown. But were they running towards safety, or just deeper into the nightmare? As the city limits fell away and they disappeared into the darkness of the open highway, one final thought lingered in the air between them like smoke, chilling Daniel to the bone. Some love stories start in prison, but some nightmares follow you out. And this was just the beginning. The story doesn't end here. The chase has just begun, and the secrets are only starting to unravel. What does her ex really want? And how far will they have to go to finally be free? If you thought the story was intense, you have no idea what's coming next. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you are not going to want to miss what happens in the next chapter. Thanks for watching.